And you have returned to SRV Loka, Ramakrishna Loka, Ma Sharda's own realm, where we have been discussing for the last hour and a half, plus our break, because we went on with the discussion while you were all having your break, with these ideas or axioms, as they may be, points or principles, of how Brahman manifests itself in the universe, if it manifests at all, how it associates with forms but never identifies with them unless it's a masterful way of doing so. So we had in the first half gone through this whole points chart, and in reference to the principles, which are important, and we probably want to begin there because Advaita was put there under the cosmic as a sort of doorway that you come from formlessness into form. That's the Nitya to the Leela, according to Sri Ramakrishna. Nitya is the formless reality. Leela is how it plays in form. That's more of a tantric concept, but it's not unknown in the Advaita Vedanta, and even considered by Gaudapada and others, although not favored as much, the idea of Leela or sportive play. But as we were talking about recently, Shankara viewed that a little bit different even than his teacher's teacher, Gaudapada. Satsang Saturday we were speaking about that. And, it's small points, and they're not probably essentially important, but nonetheless, if we want to have that great boon of seeing God in everything, seeing Brahman everywhere and in everything, then it would have to be done through this kind of understanding of avastas or stages, how Brahman can take on a form and give it up, just like you can do that out of deep sleep into waking, or take on a dream body and then take on a waking body and give them both up in deep sleep, and then at the end of a lifetime, like the Tibetan Buddhists would say, enter a bardo of having a subtle form or a causal form, or maybe even go straight to the Buddha, the light of the Buddha, and dissolve there, if that's your ability to do so. So that's a doorway you're talking about, and we will look at that in terms of this chart, because you see the soul, in using the metaphor of space, heading for that formless reality, and all the names for it there. And I think that we can probably go there, but I wanted to make sure that you knew we were coming out of this Advaita kind of non-dual porthole. We may use it with this metaphor, and how consciousness will decide to take a form, and how it will do that, and from what level, or you could say chakra, it would do that. When you study the Kundalini Yoga system, which helps a lot, because there is a Yoga Kundalini Upanishad, remember, that's very powerful. So you can see how the Kundalini system and Tantra and Vedanta were really never that divorced from each other. They had their own points to make, and they had their own river to flow down, but they often mingled their waters, as I've said. So if there's a Kundalini or Yoga Kundalini Upanishad amongst the 108 existing Upanishads left, and you'll find out there that they're talking about beings being born from in different centers, or from different centers of consciousness. So heart center, of course, we know that's beyond relativity. Eating, drinking, sex life, as Ramakrishna said, procreation. Or beyond ancestors, elementals and humans and animals and insects. Those are all going on at the three lower centers, and beings can actually die in those centers and be reborn in those centers. Die means, of course, to give up the form and then take on another form. So the Krishna calls that revolving in rajas, in activity. They don't go anywhere, he says. They're following the path of the moon. If they do go, it's just back to the ancestors, and then return again into human birth, hopefully. We read this story in the first half. the creator God, Brahma, was talking about, do you want a horse body, do you want a cow body? So we know that that's a possibility in both Hindu Dharma and Buddhist Dharma, that beings are taking on all sorts of forms. And by the way, speaking of Krishna, he says that in the Gita too. There are all sorts of wombs to be born in, Arjuna, tamasic, rajasic, and sattvic. So he's not specifically coming out and saying, you're going to be a cow next lifetime, but he is saying that you're born according to your gunas, your karmas and your gunas. He's giving that explanation quite a bit in the Gita. So it's up to the soul what kind of a body it wants to take on and why it would have to take that body. Like dreaming to be a moth. People used to say, oh, it's so funny they believe in reincarnation, like they could be born as a moth. Well, you're talking about a 5-minute or 10-minute dream that you had that you were a moth, or a bird for that matter, and you gave it up when you woke up. It's the same way with taking on a body in the waking state. A fly doesn't have very long time to live on the window pane. And that's just kind of a flash of nervous energy in a greater mind. I think I will experience that body. So on a higher level of consciousness, beings are doing that too. Like one devotee once said to Sri Ramakrishna, my greatest desire is to have you born as my son. And Sri Ramakrishna remained quiet. So after he passed away, this devotee had a young boy that was just like Sri Ramakrishna. He thought, he fulfilled my wish. And there he is in the form. But the child died in a few months. So be careful what you ask for, as they say. But it's that consciousness, beyond the attachment people have to forms and the suffering they have losing them and all of that people would get pulled into. A higher teaching is that the association of consciousness with forms and the giving them up is all kind of a natural process. It's certainly natural for beings who are aspiring, who are attained, and who are masterful. They're looking at the whole process, cosmology on down, entirely differently than most people are. And they have this mastery is of their consciousness, and that consciousness is of the mind. When you consider a form, it's of the mind. When you consider no form, it's of Brahman. And it's just that simple, really, to put it in those terms. It's either with form or it's without, or it's with gunas or it's without gunas. So it's really quite a simple teaching. And if it's saguna, you've got all of this to consider and more. Because this is a mixed bag we went through. Even at the cosmic level, it's a mixed bag we went through. There's samsaras in it, mayas in it, sacrifices in it. Things that are difficult are in it, but things that are very beautiful are also in it. Practice and sadhana and attainment and mastery of the prana, and know how everything gets projected by the cosmic mind. There's a lot of very profound wisdom to be gleaned inside of form. So it's not probably just so off the cuff as saying, I'm out of here, I'll never come back to form again, I don't need it, or I hate it, because I don't want to be here anymore. You would want to be here if you were enlightened about form and about all its possibilities. I mean, look at this Gopuram that we have here on this chart. If you go up close to that, those are levels and levels and levels of beings. Gods, asuras, humans, children, animals. You'll find everything there in all of those levels. If you go up close to it and just look at it for 5 minutes, you can take 4 or 5 square feet of one level and just see all the beings that are in it. Is it just somebody's architecture? Say, I think I'll impress people, or is this really how they're trying to describe to you the kingdoms of heaven within, and how they're gradated, and how many different beings of different levels occupy that? And you can't even stop there, because here on earth there are illumined souls, there are masterful souls, there are attained souls, and there are struggling souls, and there are suffering souls, and there are evil souls, all in one level. See? So it's not so cut and dried as it would seem. It's all interlaced. Like even down here in the earth realm, with cows and horses and so forth, and moths and birds. So the person who comes into form with the advantage of knowing the formless is a person who has Advaitic wisdom, or has mother wisdom, we like to say. And that can even be described in some of the stotrams of India, for instance, that are very beautiful to refer to. Samasteshu vachushvanu shutam ekam samastani vastuniana sprishanti Vyadvatsada shudamarcham swarupam Sanicha palabdis swarupahamatmam The Avatut sings in his stotram, there is only this one reality. It exists in all beings, and everything exists in it. It filters down and touches all hearts and minds, yet nothing can touch it. It is like the sky, pure and serene, subtle and impossible to taint. That one am I. I am that one. And there can be none other. So as far as words can go, then you find out that these stotrams of India, which are all non-dual in nature, that is, you can have bhajan singing about this ideal and that ideal, and gods and cosmic mind, and all sorts of songs that will be sung on the level of form. But these stotrams that speak specifically in terms of formlessness, as far as words can tell, then do a very good job of conveying to people, to aspiring souls, the nature of reality as being undivided, all-pervasive. Like Sri Ramakrishna said, sugarcane is saturated with sweetness. So Brahman is in everything, giving everything that sweetness. If you recognize it, which probably would come in train with recognizing the opposite, or its power, Maya, its power to veil itself, see, or to distort itself to make it look like something else. And then you're a person availed of form who is also accompanied by Mother Wisdom. And as Holy Mother said, what does a man of wisdom fear of rebirth? See? At other times she'd tell people, may you never come here again. And you could see the wisdom in that. Come here to this world of suffering again, where there's no real satisfaction attached to anything. If you're a witness, you haven't come here. That's what's hard to understand about ajativada, birthlessness, deathlessness of the soul. It's that they're born without being born. And that's described several ways by Sri Krishna in the Gita too. And how formlessness can assume a form without ever identifying with the form and give up the form. Like Krishna would talk about it in terms of bees carrying honey, from different kinds of flowers to the hive, and nobody ever sees that. Or the wind carrying the fragrances of flowers to people's noses, and nobody ever sees that. He comes and he goes, but nobody sees him doing so. So you think of analogies in the world to try and describe how Brahman disports itself here. Remember that class series we had some months ago, how Brahman disports itself on its 4 feet, waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and turiya, how it gets around its own projection. So, if you weren't thinking in terms of non-duality, you'd say, I can't accept that because Brahman doesn't move. You see, so you're staying at the non-dual level. So then when you're down here, Brahman is somehow disporting itself without being seen. All of these beings got born and they took form and then they give it up. And you're talking about the world bewitching Maya and so forth. But Maya doesn't exist outside of Brahman. That's the underlying foundation of everything. So you can't separate Maya from Brahman. One Buddhist school tried that and made a mess out of things for hundreds of years. And so just calling it outright illusion, no, it's a statement of fact, Vivekananda came to tell us. Maya is a statement of fact. It's what happens when God takes on forms and gives them up, all without attachment. So even Hastamalaka here then, fruit as clear as the fruit in the palm of his hand, is telling us there is only this one, and it touches everything but nothing can touch it. And he's saying, I am that one and there can be no other than that one. He's coming from a state of absolute non-duality in full comprehension of Ajativada. Let's look at Ajativada first, and then we'll look at Parinama. Because this first class of 4 will be more about the points of Upanishads, and we won't return to the points of Upanishads in the next 3 classes. I'm sorry, the principles of Upanishad. Did I say points? This class will be more about the principles of the Upanishads, about Brahman. And we probably won't return to them except at the end, maybe to look quickly at the Tower of Truth and words that can describe the indescribable. So if we look at the first entrance there, the doorway from form to formlessness, I'm calling it here, then we're looking at this principle, which is a pillar under the Nat Mandir, under the arena, you see, of non-duality. It's one of these great pillars that holds the whole thing up. And mentioned, of course, by Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita as the birthlessness and deathlessness, but more pronounced in Gaudapada's commentary on the Mandukya Upanishad under the category of what he calls unoriginated, which is practically everything, if not everything. I mean, you probably couldn't use the word in terms of Brahman because it doesn't come up in Brahman. But if you're looking at anything other than Brahman, or having to discuss it, like Om on down, as we were saying in our other charts, cosmic mind and so forth, and everything that gets produced out of the word by the Mahat for the purposes of embodiment. For sportive play, it's one of the things. Let's see, for sportive play, Leela, is that why it happened? The non-dualists don't accept that fully. They say, why would Aptakama want to sport? That's a name for Shiva. He's got everything. Why would he want to sport? What would be the desire to want to sport in form when he's free of desire? Aptakama. It's one of his names. So they bring that up, and I think probably bringing it up in the context of this would mean that don't forget the non-dual reality when you get into the lower levels or the secondary steps of expression or manifestation with its false superimposition that attends it all, like Brahman covering its face, or Mother covering it for him. You might want to say, if you bring Divine Mother into the quotient. My teacher, Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj, I might bring us a chart about him in the coming 3 classes, that he shares a lot about Advaita in his talks. He said from the podium once, and I heard him say this, Atman, the indivisible soul of mankind, is unborn. It does not pass in and out of existence. It is existence. This truth is discovered in consciousness as an eternal verity. This is not a matter of going inside or outside. The infinite Brahman can never be realized through the finite universe. Mind and matter are neither destructible nor indestructible. They are unoriginated. So, thank God we have a word in English that describes what's beyond the duality of creation and destruction, or birth and death. Because formlessness doesn't really quite cut it for us. Our deep sleep is formlessness, and we come out of that. So something that's transcendental and eternal and formless. You'd have to borrow a bunch of words to try and give anyone even an inkling of maybe what you're talking about when you speak wisdom or Dharma to people. If you've had the experience like Buddha had under the Bo tree, how do you put that to a society of beings? Before there was even such a thing as an arhat in that age. Like the 500 arhats who put together the Dhammapada after Lord Buddha had passed. And the Hinayana scripture, which is so valuable, I think very powerful, and shouldn't overlook it. So you could see that my teacher was speaking this way all the time. He was particularly on the non-dual level when he spoke this. Every sentence there can be taken apart and meditated upon. The infinite Brahman can never be realized through the finite universe, and Vivekananda says that's why what we're trying to do, and this mistake we keep making all the time, is we think that God is here and can be realized here. In a sense, of course, you'd know that that's the whole goal of enlightenment. But when you realize it, it's going to prove itself to be beyond all processes and before all processes too. It's anterior to life and mind, the Mundaka Upanishad says. Anterior, what's that mean? Oh, it's before life and before mind. So it's before any life. Even if you're a physicist or an evolutionist, you're looking at a paramecium or something. It was before that. It was before any form. And it is. It can't be described as being inside or outside. It can't be described as passing in and out of existence or in form, because it is the very existence which gives rise to the possibility of that. It's perfect without conception. I think that's probably on the next chart we'll look at. So I'll get going too long on Sheshanandaji's beautiful saying there that I heard and noted down. But let's look at this image. I said before, there's the embodied soul, that comet, as it were, departing time and space. And of course, we don't want to conjure up literally that this is like a black hole and there's some form moving into it and it's all in physics. This is not, we're using this as metaphorically because this is all happening inward beyond planets and stars and comets and all that. That your soul is not a physical entity, it's a spiritual verity, is what he's saying here. See, it's an eternal verity, and you have to find it inside your consciousness, that soul. Inside of consciousness itself is where that soul is. It is that. So the line of demarcation between matter and spirit, will have to go away. Between creature and creator, between God and mankind, between soul and nature, it'll disappear as if it never existed. And the truth behind that is it always exists. And so you would then maybe say, well, maybe it's playing with itself. And that's one of the theories that they say is incomplete in Advaita. Why would it, as I just said, why would the soul want to play this game of masks with itself? Suffer, feel like it's really suffering, the suffering is real, just to wake itself up? Well, it is a way that Tantra favors. Sri Ramakrishna loved the idea of Leela. So the Advaitas are, again, coming from a standpoint of what is, not what seems to be or what becomes. A play will always have to end, as any child knows, by going home to its mother when it gets dark. So when the play is over, you return to the source. And as far as Vivekananda is concerned, all coming and going is pure nonsense. Where's the time which the soul will come when all of time is in the soul? Where's the space where the soul will move to when all of space is in the soul? So that's the next one. See, the work of time and space, some people opine. The whole thing here is the work of time and space, as if insentient things could give rise to an insentient soul, then you're playing into the hands like of the Darwinists and so forth. That species and birth and all that are real. It happened over one cycle that has no involution, just called evolution. And it was all some sort of a surprise to everyone. See, consciousness didn't know it was doing that. In fact, consciousness might not even be in the quotient if you're not careful. No God, no soul, no play. Time and space, only physical, only happening on one level. And then you're really dumbing down the quotient, as they say. So when the embodied soul wants to depart form, it'll head for that essence, the swarupa. There's different words put here for that, not just in Sanskrit, but in all ways we can understand it. Brahman, moksha, mukti. It is a state of hand of liberation where the soul dreams itself away from its own essence and then wakes up to its own essence. But that moksha state doesn't change with this apparent movement or this apparent dream going on. Formlessness, if you want to go to English, transcendence, awareness, those are three words that you could use if you could explain them or understand them by contemplating them. When you're talking about the return to the source, the name of a good book we used to read back in the 60s, Return to the Source, we all like that book. Nirvikalpa would be Vedanta's name for the ultimate state of non-duality, formlessness. Nirvi, which just means that doesn't exist. It's made extinct. It's blown out. It's like a candle, it's snuffed. And kalpa means time, imaginings in time. So all those imaginings in time just got snuffed out when you had that experience. And you realized that they were nothing but dreams or projections, and they were nothing but empty. And they didn't have any substance in them. And you were just playing. You were just sporting with yourself, dreaming. So, from dreams awake, from bonds be free, know the truth, thou art he, thou art she. Another thing that Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj used to say to us from the podium. From dreams awake, from bonds be free, know the truth, thou art he, thou art she. So, thou art Shiva, thou art Shakti. So all dreams, you will want to awake from them. And know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Then Chaitanya is another, back to this more Sanskrit. Chaitanya is a name for consciousness, really, in India. It was also the name of one of the great incarnations of Krishna and Radha. So that was a great soul there. The Lord, Bhagavan, they call him, Chaitanya. But using it in the Advaitic way, Chaitanya is a word in Sanskrit for consciousness itself, as the thing in itself. Kaivalya, we know that word from yoga, and it's very apropos, although it might not be the ultimate, because we know in yoga asampragyata, or the seedless state, is the highest state. Kaivalya then is very apropos. Why? Because it shows that there's a tendency of the soul to isolate itself, which is the word they use in English for Kaivalya, isolation from nature. In other words, what produces names and forms. The soul wants to all of a sudden isolate itself from that. And very indicative of, and particular to India's way of thinking, that enlightenment, Brahman, all of those are formless. And until you acclimatize yourself to that and contemplate it, you do that by contemplating away what's with form, to prove that you're still there when form is gone. So you're going to have to be the witness there. It's all gone now, it's gone, my mind has stopped vibrating, I'm seeing the light. Am I going to die? My ego's dying. No, I waited a while, I'm still here. I am still here. I pervade everything. Just like I am that one am I, there can be none other. So thou art that, is how they put that in India. Tatvamasi, that thou art. So Kaivalya brings up that another idea of a kind of doorway from form to formlessness and back. If you took on nature, then give it up. In Vedanta, it would be, you projected it, now dissolve it. In Tantra would be, you brought it all out of the word, now play in it and go home at the end of the play. You see, I mean, different beings will feel differently about these incomplete theories about the soul and creation. And of course, for the sake of enjoyment, would probably fall lowest on the estimation of most seers, unless it's exquisite enjoyment, and that would kind of go with the play, you see. But this is Gaudapada's own list about his taking to task, or maybe he's got a little contention with anyone meddling with the pure non-dual philosophy, and the way it's just, without argument with any other school, obviously the superior way. Non-duality doesn't even have to be given a country, or a name, or a philosophy, and that's one advantage we have, if we will take it, in America or in the West. Non-duality doesn't have any religious baggage attached to it. It's not even bringing forth any mention of attainment or non-attainment, or karma, and all the problems I'm going to have here in relativity. It's just the non-dual way. It's the way of clear seeing. It's the third eye open. And it is clarity to the yogi. Along with that word Kaivalya then would come words like mature detachment and khyati, discernment. Viveka khyati, I have my discriminating wisdom, clarified the whole thing for me. And like what the Avatut would sing in that regard, it's just all clear as a bell to me now. In another one of these beautiful stotrams, he would sing something like, Nirmula mula rahito hisadoditoham Nirduma duma rahito hisadoditoham Nirdipa dipa rahito hisadodipoham Gyanamritam samarasam Gaganopamoham Gyanamritam samarasam Gaganopamoham. Nirmula. He says basically, I am acreate. And I borrowed that word from Swami Vivekananda. I am acreate, distinct from all worlds, projected by the mind. I am ever present, never obscured by clouds of might covering, conjured by ignorance. I am the light shining in other objects, self-luminous. I am pure existence, equanimity, and ecstasy, as boundless as the sky and infinite like space. So he has that to say about creation and non-creation, or projection and dissolution. What else here we could sing indicative of this chart in terms of, like, say, action and inaction. Niskarma karma pranam satav karmoni disanga sanga rahitam paramam vinodam Nirdeha deha rahitam satatam vinodam Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. He sings there. The Avatut, ever free from action, engaged in the highest acts, but free of karma. He enjoys the non-attachment in a state of seeming attachment. Dwelling in the body, he enjoys the unimaginable joy of bodilessness. Therefore, I know I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky and infinite like space. And other great slokas that describe this for us. This is all, of course, from the Avatuta Chalisa, we sometimes call it, or Gyanamritam Stotram, the nectar of non-dual awareness. And other verses might come up in regard to this as we finish up this chart. So, incomplete theories about soul and creation, they're not saying false, but there's something that's left to be desired, as we say, ironically, in each one of these. Is it the will of the Lord? Is it the work of time and space? Is it for the sake of enjoyment? It is for sportive play. According to Gaudapada in his Karika, these are incomplete. He likes non-origination, that it never was in the first place, any of it. And it will never cease to be at the same time. It's just sort of like Praticca Samudpata. We were talking about that at the break. The dependent arising of phenomena. And how that's all, as we would say in our tradition, just everything coming up and out of Brahman. This chart then continues on with truth about the soul and creation. If you want to really know about that, though it seems like a duality, then they'll set you right as Advaitic masters. It is unborn, and of course we just are looking at that Ajativada. It is unborn, so it can never be destroyed. And there you'd go and sing Nirvana Shatkam of Shankara, Mrichor, and so forth. It is free of sleep. We were talking about that earlier, how the body needs to rest, but the mind never does. And the mind's natural state is just the ever-awake state, yogic insomnia. And body and brain are different than mind. So body and brain, you may overtax your nervous system, and the brain then may have problems, and the body needs to rest every once in a while, so they need to be refreshed and everything. But the mind, and we'll look at that probably next week if we get to it, in terms of the Mahat, which is the next entry on this chart of points about Brahman from the Upanisads. Then you'll see, when you understand the Mahat, how it's just a sun of wisdom always turned on, always shining. So it's free of sleep, and therefore devoid of dreams. You wouldn't be having problems with dreams and nightmares if you were ever awake. And that's called omniscience and so forth. Or it's called by Jesus, if thine eye is single, if thine eye is single, you'll know that truth of existence. And live in it all the time. It's free of names and forms. We're talking about that, rupa rupa, nama nama, I would put it that way too. It's free of names and forms, but can also associate with them, as we've been talking about. But we don't want to probably fall out of the non-dual quite yet as we take this doorway. It is spontaneous, spontaneous and immediate. As Gautamata says, flashing up all at once, like intense concentration, but without conceptualization. So somebody came along and did us a good service by taking that Sanskrit and making it lucid in English. It's like pure concentration without breaks, but no conceptualization in it. That's brilliant. Even in English, it's like a mantra. And that will help you understand the nature of consciousness, Chaitanya, non-dual awareness. It's omniscient. Jumped the gun on that one. It is free from conceptualization. Jumped it again. And it is intense concentration without end. So these are all points from Gaudapada's Karika, of course, on the Mandukya Upanishad. A little Upanishad of just 12 slokas that he put his mind on. Shankara came along and put his mind on 10 or 11 more. But for Gaudapada, he saw that one short, to the point, non-dual, almost a doorway between Brahman and the expressions of Brahman. So he says here his own words, mind and entities are traditionally known as free of creation and destruction. Yeah, whose tradition are we talking about? Mother India's and Mother India's only would think in terms of no creation, no destruction. Who else would even think about that when they're faced with all of that? And they're coming from the ground up. Body, senses, brain, energy, with then somewhere I lost track of prana and subtle senses and the dream state and all the significance. I lost track of where I came from. The breadcrumbs were all pecked away by the birds of forgetfulness as soon as I got to the senses with their objects. Oops. So I'm sorry to break into Gaudapada's beautiful words there, but he says, minds and entities are traditionally known as free of creation and destruction. Those who know this do not fall into error. When the dreaming mind vibrates, it gives rise to the two and the many. But when it is free of all cause and effect, it remains unoriginated. So it's the mind that's falling into that error, or not. Or falling into it and correcting it when you have a master like that, a past master teaching it, or reminding you of it. This is a beautiful chart and easy of study. It's like Advaita itself. It just really has all the essence there in it. There's not a lot to tax the mind with, but there's a lot to contemplate. And like even one sentence of my teacher's quote there. At the bottom from the Akshi Upanishad, I mentioned that earlier in this class, how beautiful that Upanishad is. Akshi means, Akshitam means that third eye. All is one, unborn, tranquil, endless, certain, and immutable. See reality as spirit. Be even-minded and at ease. This is the state through which you will become liberated even while inhabiting a body. Who said that? The sun god said that to Samkriti in the Akshi Upanishad. Oh, it went to the sun, repaired inside. Oh, sun god, tell me all this wisdom. You're the knower of it all. So the second sloka, I think, in that Upanishad is, Samkriti, here it is. All is one, unborn, tranquil, endless, certain, and immutable. Look upon everything as spirit. Then be even-minded and at ease. I mean, you see how it really covers all three levels of philosophy: the non-dual, the qualified non-dual, and the dual. To live, to pass your time contentedly and be free, Shankara was to say several thousand years later. So that's the beauty of non-duality expressed from the non-dual from the qualified non-dual platform by a person who remains in non-duality as the expression is going forth, and unbroken. You talk about "May the circle be unbroken." It's a nice song in the West, but it talks about in terms of relativity. When you talk about this circle being unbroken, you're talking about something that's much finer, and, well, how to describe it beyond what the Upanishad and Surya Narayan just told us, the sun god. You'll probably find him somewhere here in this mandapam here. In the time remaining, because it was my hope that we would be able to look at the two pillars. We've looked at them separately before. I don't remember having them side by this, but I can tell you I feel really good in the middle of them right now. And these two pillars are what I've been calling them anyway, because you can see there are many other pillars, or at least sub-pillars, to non-duality. But these pretty much epitomize it and are mentioned a lot in the Gita and in the Upanishad both. The birthlessness and deathlessness of the soul means non-origination, and then non-transformation. You put those side by side, it's just glorious. It's like all of a sudden having two eyes to see. Maybe that was that two-eyed God up at the top of the mandapam. So we look at this aparinama, and as I've talked about it before, this beautiful image behind is a local artist here in Hawaii painted it, and very beautiful, these flowers falling out of space and all being offered as it were out of a basket in the sky to the Pele, the goddess of fire there in the lava. And so it was wonderful that I could use that as the backdrop to this teaching of Aparinama, which is all about non-transformation, when the whole world is going on with the idea that transformation is real, and they're being pulled here and there by this appearance of change and thinking the change to be actual. You could say that it then gets into our educational system, and we study chemical change, for instance, how to put things together in the laboratory. And so we began to be convinced, even by our educational systems, and remember that's aparavidya you're talking about, the lower knowledge. It's not the higher knowledge. Then we become convinced and begin to think in those terms, that change is real. Studied in nature, nature becomes real. Studied in the world becomes real. And so this chart gets put up, and we often look at it at times to see, on my left, on your right, the principle of non-transformation. And there's Swami Vivekananda's very powerful quote about it. When he was here in 1893, a kind of scientific Advaitism has been spreading throughout Europe ever since the theory of conservation of energy was discovered. Conservation of energy is discovered. But all that is parinama, evolution by real modification, as contrasted to aparinama, progressive manifestation by unreal superimposition. That's really pretty much enough to read, because he goes on about Ramanuja's theory about, makes it more personal, about how we all have our perfections involved and then we have to bring them out to evolve them. But according to the Advaitas, that's all a show. To bring something out from inside and put it outside was all transformation, wasn't it? So I think I'll make myself a better person by expressing what's inside of me. That's fine, but you should have done it knowing that it was all perfect to begin with and that the process was unreal. It didn't prove anything. And neither does all this change outside prove anything to us, except that everything's always changing. That's the final proof of it. And that's where you would go to the teaching of shunyata, for instance, or non-origination. From there, you would have no other recourse but to, for lack of a better word, to demur and to fall back on those non-dual pillars that have been given to you by the ancient rishis. And so you can see that Swamiji was really up to date in his thinking and trying to look for places. For instance, when he met Westerners and went to England and met them, and when he met Nikola Tesla and people like that in the East Coast, who were all busy with making electricity, for instance, and so enchanted and hypnotized by the tricks of prana, as Sri Ramakrishna would say, and so taken in by them. In India you would probably say, well, there's that problem of Maya again going on. And be wary of it. So that quote starts off this, interestingly enough, this description of a parinama. All happenings taking place in relativity resemble the activities of a man running a race in a dream. Now we're back to Gaudapada and his distinctive way of saying things. Nothing actually transpires. Scenery, movements, race, dream, all are unreal, or appearance only. The dreamer alone is real, but he must awaken to realize this. So there are songs in India like that too. Oh dreamer, awake, awake, you must, because this is your chance to do it. To come out of sleep into awakeness, or to awaken to the awakening state, or to understand that the dream is not real, but the dreamer is. Those are all ways in which even beings who are attempting to know or explain what Advaita is, non-duality is, are aware of. We say that in India, we call that akamai. So they're kind of in the know about things that are happening like that. And so they would use, like in songs we were singing, and they would use scriptures and songs to describe those to you. And then we get into some names here for reality, which is allowable, even from the standpoint of non-duality. Brahman, Paramatman is the non-transformational reality. So beyond beyond everything that's parinama or changing is a parinama. And there you have Sri Krishna saying in the Gita, Asat bhavo nabhavo vijite sataha ubiyor api drishantos tu anayos tattvadarshi bihi is the sloka in the Gita where he says the unreal has no existence. The real never ceases to be. The truth about both has been realized by the seers. So that's every bit as cogent as Gaudapada's sayings. And there you find it in Bhagavad Gita. So you can see why Prasthanatrayam, those two scriptures plus the Brahma Sutras, occupy the highest rung. Those are the landmarks of scriptural history in the whole world to Advaitas and to other beings too, everyone who has come to know about Mother India's great treasures, especially around Advaita Vedanta. And so if you want to give it a slight turn, this you want to say, like, we're heading through a doorway, and we've taken on qualified non-dualism or dualism. Hopefully we haven't taken on anything that's unreal and thought it to be real, so that we have to shed it and take so much time and effort and suffering to do so. Then you'd be coming into witness of these words like Pratyagatman and Antaryami. I was telling everyone at satsang last Saturday, everyone has an eternal companion. And I was thinking, Holy Mother had 4 goddesses walking around her when she was a little girl in her village. And so she had these 4 goddesses come to her when she was just a little girl walking around there. And she, once she said to her mother, who are those women? And her mother said, what do you mean? What women? Those 4 goddesses, or those 4 women that are walking with me everywhere I go. I go to the bathing god, I come back, and so forth. They're always accompanying me. So I was thinking 2 things about that. How beautiful if you have an eternal companion with you like that. And from India, that wouldn't be considered like insane, or, you've got a split personality, or whatever the nonsense they're talking about here when they leave God out of the quotient. But if you're talking about God who's capable of everything, Brahman that can associate with a form as well as give it up, and you're cut in that image, then you're talking about the ability to surround yourself with divinity. Why not start thinking that you have an eternal companion with you all the time, or several of them? Why not just work that into the quotient right now? They've been with me all the time. You could, you could say like in the Jewish scriptures, she's the mother of wisdom. I put her on like raiment. I put her on like clothing, and I walk around with her. So you have this ideal that goes around with you all the time. You can talk to it, you can think about it, you can contemplate it, and you can shed all fear through it. And no matter what situation you might come into. I mean, probably that's the idea about guardian angel in Christianity. It would be an envisionment you do of an inner principle. And that gets me on the subject because of the word antaryami. That's the inner ruler immortal that's seated in your heart. But it can express itself in a form. So part of your meditation process on God with form is to envision that form. You're sort of bringing it out of formlessness. In India, if you were following the tradition, you'd start with the feet in your meditation. You might meditate for weeks building the feet, so you can really see the feet inside of your heart. And then you'd add the legs and the waist and the arms, and find the face and then the eyes. So you're building chinmayi, you see, a form of awareness, chin matra, out of pieces of matras of intelligence that are in your own mind, you see, your own abilities. You build her out of light, or him out of light. And then you have a friend there forever because you've constructed from the ground up and you've taken time to do it, and then it becomes a manifestation of God in your life. And that can go so far as to even take on a form out here. Like Sri Ramakrishna seeing the statue of Mother Kali in the temple that he worshipped, coming alive and walking. He said, one night I was walking up the stairs, the temple, near midnight, she ran by me. with anklets jingling and bracelets jingling, naked, just like in the temple. She just ran by me up the stairs. Feel the wind, you see. So other beings who came to Sri Ramakrishna, had meditated on the pratika, like a statue of Ram, and Ram had come alive and become a baby, and feed the baby, and nurture the baby, and talk to the baby, the young child, you see. And then it would go back into the image. So all of this is part of the dynamics of spiritual life, and has a good thing to do with the Bhakti path. So when you say Antaryami, this is the inner ruler immortal seated in the heart of every being. It's a very powerful word in Sanskrit. Sakshi, of course, I've used that word multiple times today. Sakshi is the witness, and so Shankara sees that as the pivotal point between form and formlessness, between ego and ripe ego. And in order to become the detached witness of all phenomena outside. If you were to attain that, then a parinama would be a thing realized for you. You wouldn't believe in parinama anymore. You'd be looking at everything saying, don't believe it, don't believe it, don't believe it. And you'd be telling others, don't believe it, don't believe it. It's a charade, it's Maya, it's a sleight of hand, it's a prestidigitation by the hand of Maya. It's a legerdemain. I looked up all the words for it in English dictionary. It's a diaphanous thing. It's too subtle. So there are English words to explain this appearance that's being foisted upon you after the wool's been pulled over your eyes. And you want to the seers who are masterful, they want to reach up and tear that off and see everything as it is, and they will see Brahman. And they'll see Brahman in everything and then beyond everything, like Hastamalaka did. See, there is that one. There's none else but that one, and I am that. There can be none other. Come to that complete understanding, 100% assurance, the courage of his Advaitic convictions, that all is true. The self is all in all, and none else exists, and thou art that. That's how Swami Vivekananda put it in his Song of the Sannyasin. And then Om, there you see. So this chart is everything that's non-transformational, and it begins to look like transformation can happen. Because if you have a witness, you're not yet in non-dual awareness. That's why you dissolve the words and their understandings into the mind where they came from, and that into the intellect where it came from, and that into the ego, and then the ego gets convinced and it gives it back into the sakshi, see, to the witness. Now it's up to the witness to look and see where it came from and where it's apparently going and what is behind both. The underlying, the stationary, the foundation, the unmoving, the pure, the inactive, and all the other appellations which they come forward for Brahman. We should probably bring that chart next week. And when it comes to Om, then you know that's a two-petaled thing. You see, that's manifestation and withdrawal, projection and withdrawal at a very, very high level. And it's with God, and it is God. And in the beginning, it was with God, it was God, and it is God. So you have that understanding of something that's giving rise to change at the highest level of intelligence. And that really comes about as mind and will come into the picture. So you say here, Maya kicks in about then. Maya is a very high cosmic principle. It's in Shaivism, it's one of the upper crust of principles. If you look at the Kashmiri Shaivism system, name, form, time, space, and causation, and that's why you want to call it illusion, and just leave off or say beware of it, or you have to know that one of its characteristics is to veil things, and that you have to be aware of. But you also have to know that it's not sentient, so it's not on purpose, like say a devil, trying to get at you, some negative being. It's just really the nature of form to cover formlessness. That's its nature. So when the soul takes on form, and when it gives it up, then it's playing with that risk and with that principle. And if you know these, if you have a witness, if you know about the word and its potentials and the substratum, and you have this inner ruler, immortal, seated in your heart, and I am that, then of course all of this is a kind of sportive play that is innocuous, can't really change the truth of non-duality in your mind. Ajativada aparinama. It's like, that's right, weightlifting, spiritual weightlifting. Prakriti, manifest and unmanifested nature, would be one thing that you'd want to know about all of this, if to come armed, I mean, you don't bring a knife to a gunfight, they say. Nowadays, guy pulls out a knife when everyone's holding guns. Oops. So in the same way, here, you'd not want to come to this world without these two guns, knowledge of Prakriti and Maya. If you know about them, then they are based in Brahman, like the poison is based in a snake. And the snake never suffers from the poison. But you will if it bites you. So you're very careful, and you know everything at that level of apparent transformation. See? We're calling it apparent transformation, parinama, because otherwise it becomes mithya gyan, it becomes false knowledge. And there are other words for that too that we've looked at. That you don't want, if you call it actual transformation, then of course you've fallen into the hands of Maya and will suffer accordingly. You're right there in the midst of samsara, thinking every little thing to be real, all the way down to your fears and your doubts and your sufferings and your nightmares, and all the problems of the world become not only eminently real to you, they take over the whole game of life. It's definitely not a sportive play anymore. It's a sour play, like Shakespeare's Frowning Face, you see. Tragedy it is. Here you see this quote from Swamiji, which is one of my favorite to explain this level. Though knowledge, being a compound, cannot be the absolute itself, it is the nearest approach to it and higher than will or desire. So if you have intelligence, mother intelligence, and you come into the world, then Maya never suggests itself to you. You're never in Maya. Maya's in you, so get rid of it. You see all as Brahman. You just see it as Brahman with manifestation or Brahman without, Brahman with form or Brahman without, Brahman with qualities or Brahman without. And when it does have qualities or gunas or form, you only need to point that out and stick to the non-dual as the foundation of everything. Non-duality is supreme. There's no better attitude to have than that, Gaudapada says, for all those many reasons. So intelligence is the first compound, Vivekananda said, using a scientific way of saying to the Westerners at the time. It's the first compound of consciousness, so it's an admixture that comes out of pure conscious awareness. Intelligence is the first thing. And he didn't agree with some of the Buddhist schools about that. No, will isn't the first thing that comes out. Intelligence is, and desire certainly isn't. So he was trying to clear that up for us when he pointed that out. It's very sattvic. If you wanted to look back on this chart, you'd have to put it there at the level of Mahat. So that's where sattvic intelligence is at its best. So I think probably it's a good place to stop, and we will look at this to warm up our philosophical minds and mindset next week at the same time, Sunday, and we take class 2 of this, and this will launch us into actually anything that happens under the auspice of parinama, change. Again, based on knowing a parinama would make this all understandable like it is to Swamiji, obviously. And that will help us get into this doorway of the cosmic, because this cosmic in India is a very powerful word. The cosmic and the collective, and then the individual, as I said. They look at these as 3 levels of mind. So when mind gets into the process, it gets into it at a very pure sattvic level. And that's, again, non-threatening to the devotee. Like the Word and the Trinity and the cosmic egg, Hiranyagarbha, and also Mahamaya. Maya is at a very high level when it's at the cosmic level of things. And if you see that and you take it with you into the worlds of becoming, you can do so you can be born without actually being born. And you can, since you're never born, you'll never die. You always have this idea of these ajatavada, no birth, no death for the soul, ever, even when it thinks itself as a transmigrating soul. And you'll also know that the transformation that's taking place around it as it apparently moves, very hard to talk about, of course, is non-actual. It's not happening. Brahman can't transform, and Brahman is the only thing that exists. So there's what you're left with. So here, let's end with a chant and move on towards next week's class. Om Tachnayo, Om Tachnayo Ravrani Mahe, Gatung Yagyaya, Gatung Ye Nupataye, Daivi Swastarastu Naha, Swastir Manusebyaha, Urdvam Jagatu Pesajam, Sangno Astu Dvipade Sangchatushpate, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May we always and ever make a great offering of the small self into the true self. May we always delight in this offering. May we always revere the Lord and Mother of all sacrifices. May divine blessings be upon the entire human race. May healing, well-being, and prosperity also abide with us. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.